Pre-show quid pro quo. Saul, you get 3 questions. They can be any question in the world. They can be, why don't we encounter malevolent spirits more often? It could be, is there a magical tool or concept that doesn't work the way that many people think it does or not at all? It could be a question like, what is the best houseplant for a magician? You have any question, go ahead and ask them.
You write such good questions. What am I even here for? Let's just go with the ones that you came to the show with.
Oh, perfect. So this is a little bit of because this is a Chaos Magic episode, I got to give a bit of a backstory here, folks. Saul emailed me this morning. My guest, Saul, emailed me. And he said, I've got 3 questions for you for the pre-show quid pro quo. And normally, I like to get the pre-show quid pro quo to be completely unknown to me. But Saul, I don't think he could help himself, so he sent me an email. He said, which one of these do you want?
I didn't want to ambush you.
No, but I enjoy the ambush. Truth be told, I allowed it. It's chaos magic. Let's go with the chaos. So he wrote those 3 questions that I went through a little bit earlier. And I said, oh, fuck. You know what? Let's go for all of them. So this is the first 3-part pre-show quid pro quo. So the first question was, why don't we encounter malevolent spirits more often? Maybe a problem with the question is that the idea of something being malevolent is a strange one because who's to say that the spirits are malevolent? I think that perhaps a couple of things have happened. For one, we have to understand that for a lot of the spirits, they don't know that they're malevolent. They just kind of do their thing, and then it is taken by us as being malevolent in some strange way. Now, personally speaking, I tend to gravitate towards the malevolent spirits. If there's spirits that people talk about and they say, don't interact with these spirits, I'm there almost immediately. And I've found that usually it's never as bad as people say that they are. But we have done this thing where perhaps we could even go to an example like Johann Weyer, where he would say that a lot of the people that are being prosecuted by as witches or that are being possessed by evil spirits, that they're actually mentally ill. I think maybe 95% of that was correct, but then there was also the 5% where there was definitely some kind of spirit possession that occurred with some people, whether it be malevolent or not. I think that the spirits are always still there, but it's just that they've changed and that they don't really know that they're malevolent. It's that they've changed and we've changed. Now, and I have had things where it's downright terrifying. One of them specifically involving when I was working with the Grimoire Verum, somewhat Lucifer heavy. And I was reading Chaos Protocols and I did a Crossroads ritual basically to invoke Lucifer. And that spirit was incredibly, to begin with, was incredibly malevolent.
Really? You're the first person I've ever heard to say a bad word about Lucifer.
It was at night, and it was almost as if the darkness turned even darker, and I felt something that I'd never felt before. But that was just the initial reaction, and I could understand why people would be very scared. Then after that, it was actually quite calming. I think that could be construed as being malevolent. And this might just be applying a different label to malevolent, but I don't really go for the idea of malevolent spirits. I call them histrionic spirits. I think that they want attention. And specifically now where we have relegated spirits to the margins so much, what they do as wanting attention, we misconstrue as them being malevolent. And that's basically the way that I'd put it. So, don't know if that answers your question, but technique. Is there any technique or something that people are doing wrong or that they think that somehow just doesn't work at all? Yeah, cursing. Cursing is, for one, I don't really do much of it and I never have. Romani cursing, there's many ways of doing it, but one of the most effective ways that it was done was that it was very public. You would gather the people around you, and you would literally curse every single one of the people around you. And this is just one of the techniques of cursing. This is not the only way that the Romani would curse, historically. But it was very out in the open. And yes, they would walk and curse nearly everybody around them. And of course, nowadays we say like, well, this is put on my anthropological lens. This is because eventually it would prey on the person's guilt, and then eventually somebody would tell a story or whatnot. I think that that's maybe only half right. I think the other half is that we negate the storytelling aspect of cursing. While the person is cursing, they are literally telling a story, maybe one of the oldest stories that we know. So, when people are in their rooms cursing somebody, I don't think that they know what they're doing, or It's not even effective in any way, shape, or form. And if you want to curse somewhat historically accurately, and you have the balls to do it publicly, you need to be able to sit with the consequences, because that is old school cursing, and I don't think people really know that. And we're not saying that cursing's not real, but if you want to go full curse, that's the way you have to do it. Hexing, a little bit different. Vexing, a little bit different. But as far as cursing is concerned, one, most people try not to do it, or just don't do it. Don't be an idiot. That's the main thing. It's the best way of cursing somebody is doing better than they are at life. That's really it. So either walk away or do better yourself. And the last question is best house plants for a magician. So it depends on what you want, in my opinion. I'll use an example. I've got an altar to Santa Muerte in my house. I'm not devotional to her. I would never call myself a devotee of Santa Muerte. She's basically for one major purpose in my house, and she's for protection. She is underneath a plant. It's called a Hoya plant. They're very rubbery, but what they do is that they're slow growth, and they flower quite frequently. So in the summer, at least mine does, and I found that when I put her altar there, that the flowers, they just kept coming more and more. And we have a lot of people talk about this kind of thing. But what I like about it is that the flowers themselves, they burst forth with great life, and they're really beautiful flowers, and then about a week later they die and they wither and they fall off. And I think, in a way, Santa Muerte, she likes this. It's the life cycle of the flowers itself is almost representative of death itself. So I think as far as best houseplants for magic, it depends what kind of magic you want to do. And these aren't specifically houseplants, but I do keep St. John's wort inside. St. John's wort is great for a whole bunch of things. The dead stems I will use for an aspergillum. So if I have St. John's wort as an aspergillum and I use holy water, that's doubly powerful, at least I found it so. But it can also be used for, apparently, to treat depression, if you make a tea out of it. All kinds of really great protective stuff with St. John's wort, if you can keep it alive inside. Vervain, if you work with spirits, you can keep lemon vervain alive indoors. Very good, but if you can put it outside, spirits love vervain, especially imagination vervain. If you dry it and you burn it, it's one of the best things in the world. But in my opinion, I think my favorite houseplant is pothos vine, for a lot of specific reasons. For one, I have it growing out of my fish tank, and it grows very, very fast, so I can take cuttings of it. I don't want to give away all my secrets, but one of the things that I do is I interact a lot with the anima sola, which is the lonely soul that exists in purgatory. She's a very fiery spirit. And I find that she's very effective and very fast for a lot of things. But sometimes she's so good at her job that she needs to cool down. I tend to cut off segments of my pothos, which is alive, full of water, and I will actually wrap my anima sola statues, my cards, in pothos, because I find that it just brings them down a little bit. But best houseplant? It's really, what do you want to do? And do you know enough about the plant to be able to be effective and confident that when you put a plant on an altar, or what you use the plant's flowers for, anything goes, really. And this is really new territory, because you will get a lot of books saying that this plant does this and this plant does this. And there's also like the little subcategory, like if you boil the leaves, it tastes like this, or it'll help cure headaches and stuff like that. I come at it from a very ritualistic perspective. So I tend to, what does the plant do for the ritual, or what does the plant do for the altar? And that's really what I do. So those are the three questions. Goodness.
Tremendous. And pothos is such a great suggestion because it grows so readily. It's available everywhere, and it has a beautiful variegated variety.
Absolutely. Fantastic questions, Saul. Hey everybody, welcome to What Magic Is This, a podcast that wonders what Baphomet's milk cheese would taste like. My name is Douglas Batchelor, and in this podcast, we're going to be talking about magic, the occult, the esoteric, the paranormal, the supernatural, and the weird. And if you've never listened to the show before, what happens is that I have a guest. I give them a list of about 15 topics. They get to choose one. I bring them on the show and we talk about it. A lot of the time, I do more of the talking because of the fact that think of it as a bit of a tutor session. The tutor will do most of the talking, and the student will ask a question every once in a while, and the tutor will answer it. I know it doesn't sound fun, but shut up, it is. And people are having a great time listening to the show. So, now if you haven't listened to the previous show, this is part 2 of Chaos Magic. I had 2 guests, and I sent them a list of topics, and within 30 30 minutes, they both answered Chaos Magic, and I fretted and I sweated, and I didn't know what to do. But I just said, you know what, definitely do a two-parter on Chaos Magic. And so this is going to be part 2. It's going to be a bit more conversational, this one, because I have a very special guest tonight. His name is Saul. And Saul, you're one of those guys that was maybe one of the first people to reach out to me to my podcast. So you're one of the first people that really gave me a lot of encouragement. Just said, like, man, your show is great. I love it. Keep going. So I'm sorry it took...
You do an enormous public service for all of us. The amount of research you bring to bear, I was thinking about this just this morning. It is mind-boggling how much I have learned just from listening to your work specifically. I was listening to Peter J. Carroll, the actual man, on a podcast talking about the history of the IoT. And point for point, it was material you had covered in the previous episode. So I feel like listening to this has really equipped me to speak intelligently about topics that I would have nowhere near that level of mastery without it. So thank you for what you do, and I'm excited to be on the show. I was being very coy about wanting to be on here, just dropping hints, flirting with the idea of being a guest, but all of my dreams have come true.
Wonderful. I want to put it out there. Saul reached out to me through Twitter, and Saul is one of the most gentle, loving, kindest, most honest people that you will have as a Twitter friend. People are just attracted to him. He just gathers people up like an occult vacuum, but in a really great way. I couldn't think of a better analogy, but his kindness and his patience and his need to know and to ask questions is so wonderful. And I'm not trying to wax your Corvette here, but I really do think that you have maybe my favorite Twitter account of anybody on the internet right now. I'm not just saying that. There are times...
I can't handle this level of praise. Thank you so much.
Hopefully by the end of this episode, all of my listeners will be fans. So be prepared for the torrent of people that are going to be coming to your account there, Saul, because...
Unbelievable. Thank you.
But I'm so glad to actually have you on, and we finally made it. So we're going to be talking about Chaos Magic again. So this is going to be Chaos Magic Part 2, Conversations and Currents of Chaos. Are you ready, Saul?
Absolutely.
Perfect. So I think from last episode, people might remember that there was one character that we didn't talk about. And I really wanted to save it for the second episode because I think that the first episode had a hero. And that hero was the arch-scientist, physicist Peter Carroll. For this episode, we're going to get a little bit, we'll use the word platonic. So I would like to introduce everybody to Ramsey Dukes, otherwise known as Lionel Snell, otherwise known as Adonis Philotunis, or...
He's shifted in and out of names almost as a game for so long.
I think that might be an English thing, but just giving yourself a ton of pen names. But yes, he's written under many, many pen names, and I consider him probably the greatest philosopher within the occult. And I don't know if you'd agree with me at all, but I just love absolutely everything that Lionel Snell, or otherwise known as Ramsey Dukes, does, because he is so kind and eloquent with his words. And Pete has the formulas locked down. Where Pete deals with the how of magic and how magic works, Ramsey has always been about the why of magic, which I think has been one of my favorite. And I love both questions, but the why of magic has always talked to me a little bit more. So he was born in 1945, I believe in Hertfordshire, England. Apparently he was a very smart child, and he was definitely a smart young adult. He got a degree in pure mathematics from Cambridge University, of all places. He was I would say, occult hipster. He was into Austin Osman Spare before anybody was interested in Austin Osman Spare. I think that Kenneth Grant had been writing about him, but Ramsey really went through a lot of Austin Spare's ideas, and he would write essays about all of Austin's work. And eventually, all of these essays were collected into one small book, but a book nevertheless, called Sasotbame. I'm not going to reveal what SSOTBME is. You will eventually find out if you get the book and read through it, and it's kind of fun. But this is, in my opinion, a must-read book for magic. It shouldn't be the first book on magic you read, but it should not be one of the books you read further on down the line. He goes through a lot of really interesting concepts in this one, the least of which is the idea of how human beings have interacted with the world and what ideas or epistemologies or ontologies that they use to interact. And it's split into 4 quadrants. The first is art, the second is religion, the third is magic, and the fourth is science. And in and around these, they have periphery feelings or emotions. There's intuition, and that kind of skirts between art and religion. You have thinking, which skirts between religion and science. You have sensation, which flirts between science and magic. And then you have feeling, which goes between magic and art. And he talks you through all of this. And although at the very beginning, if you're reading Sasatbami for the first time, you eventually start to get it that he is maybe saying that one of the best ways, or one of the best things about magic, is that it almost has aspects, or the best aspects, of the other 3. And I would certainly not disagree with him. I remember reading Sasatbami for the first time, and I didn't get any of it. I was quite young. I was maybe 20 years old. But it has since become maybe one of the books that I think that is most dear to me as far as ideas pertaining to magic and how magic might be a force to be reckoned with and actually worth saving and a lofty thing to orient towards.
I am ashamed to say this, but I only own one of his books. I have Uncle Ramsey's Book of Demons.
Oh.
I've followed his writings in snippets. I've watched his charming YouTube channel, and despite my lack of preparation, he is one of the living magicians that I most admire for his kindness, for his incisiveness. Some occultists develop oily sheen as they age, and they become very crabbed and very frustrated at the end of their lives, but not him.
No.
But I know of him, as so often, through distillation. In fact, the Ramsey Dukes idea that has had the greatest effect on me is from How to See Fairies. The line that you will think you're making it up, but you're not.
But you're not. Yes.
I repeat that to myself mantra-like.
Yes.
So I'm familiar with the content of Sasatbami, but I haven't read it.
Oh.
And that is often my answer to questions like
Oh,
this.
buddy, no, it's all good. And trust me, guess what? You're gonna have to read it now. I'm sorry. I'll mail you a copy. Sasatbami is only one of his works. He has a lot of other works that are very well known, and Saul's mentioned a couple of them. But after Sasatbami was released, Ramsey or Lionel, got swept up in the chaos magic current, if you will. Although he did not really consider himself at the time to be a chaos magician, his work was very influential to chaos magicians. He was talked about, and he was known. In 1977, he did the Abramelin operation, in which he locked himself in a house for 6 months, and he went through absolutely everything. So if people are interested in that side of magic, which I'm not overly interested in, but if you are, he is one of the best people to go to, and he talks about it quite a bit, and it's always interesting. He is, in my opinion, and Saul mentioned it earlier, he's almost like an uncle figure. He's the cool uncle that everybody wants to have. He's everybody's magical uncle, and I think that's...
Oh, I wish you were my dad.
I know, right? I think we all do. If Abramelin is interesting, you got to check out Ramsey Dukes. In 1978, he wrote a book called Thundersqueak. Now, Thundersqueak is one of those books that when I was young, this was my occult. This was one of my occult books. I think it's Ravings of a Right-Wing Anarchist is the subtitle. I could be wrong about that, but I remember reading it and loving it, and then coming back when I returned to the Chaos Magics and reading it again, and it was a little bit dated. It definitely seems like Ramsey had the energy that a lot of the punks had at the time. It really has that take no prisoners energy to it, but it's still a wonderful, wonderful book. He kept writing. He would write for many magazines, and he would write for anybody that would ask him to write things. And a lot of these are collected up into books. There's one that's called Blast Your Way to Megabucks with My Super Secret Sex Formula. There's What Dukes Did in His Holidays, I believe, is one of the other books. He's an interesting character to be known as he formulated, you couldn't really say he was the first person, but he really solidified the idea of an information model for the world, and specifically through something called Johnston's Paradox. Are you familiar with Johnston's Paradox?
No, this is utterly new.
Okay, so Johnston's Paradox is the one, basically, where he says that, what if we get so great at materialistic science and our computers become so wonderful that then eventually computers will have a mind of its own, and the computers will eventually invent something that will make us obsolete. It's not so much a singularity, but that they will basically be able to create for us a virtual reality universe. And if this sounds very familiar, it's because it is. And it's because through chaos magic you get things like Grant Morrison, and then through that you get things like the Matrix. The Matrix is literally Johnston's paradox, and Ramsey is the guy that came up with this. And I think he deserves a bit more respect from y'all. But his works on Johnston's paradox, specifically within Blast Your Way to Megabucks with my super secret sex formula, very interesting stuff. Definitely check it out. As I mentioned, this episode is a bit more platonic, and so I think that Ramsey he's not a guy whose works you read to get practical information about spells and whatnot. He is definitely more platonic in theories and thinking about magic and how to think with magic and what can thinking in a magical way do for you. And two books that Saul did bring up. One of them is called Uncle Ramsey's Book of Demons. Is a wonderful way of thinking about the thing that I was talking about a little bit at the beginning of the episode about maybe we have the idea of evil spirits wrong, or we just don't have them right. In this book, he goes through it, and it's really quite wonderful. And when I first bought this book, I was just like, I don't know what more he could say, but it is almost a distillation of his best ideas of magic and how magic operates in the world within this book, and it is worth getting, absolutely. The other book that Saul mentioned is called How to See Fairies. Now, up to this point, I had owned every Ramsey Dukes book except for this one. I only purchased this book maybe about 5 years ago. I hated the title of the book.
He hates the title of the book.
Yeah, I hated the title of the book, and I purchased it. It's not his best book, but it's probably my favorite book of his. And this is maybe his most practical book. The exercises in this book are wonderful, specifically ones involving walking and trying to situate yourself in the world and looking and perceiving, except no substitute. And sometimes people will ask me, I need a book recommendation for this kind of thing or how to think magically. This is usually the book that I will suggest because it's short and it's sweet and it's really quite wonderful. The character of Ramsey really comes through in this book. I highly suggest literally all of his books. There's not a bad one. And I haven't read his most current book. I forget what it was called, but he does have a book on the Abermelon operation, and not too long ago he wrote a book called My Years of Magical Thinking. On the back cover is a wonderful little blurb from none other than Alan Moore, who said that Ramsey Dukes is the most profound and innovative thinker within magic in the last several decades. So that's coming from the Wizard of Northampton, and it's pretty high praise, and I agree entirely. Ramsey's work deserves attention. Even if you're not a chaos magician or you don't like the whole chaos magic thing, you have to read Ramsey Dukes. What else does Ramsey have to offer? He's got a YouTube page, and he is really wonderful on YouTube, and all of his videos are quite fantastic. Sometimes he dresses up in a really striking outfit. Yes, he is still alive, although he had a bit of a health scare recently, but he is doing much better. He releases a video every so often, and every time a video drops, it is, for me, it's one of those things that I really look forward to.
They're always good.
Always.
Always interesting.
Yeah.
You know, to an extent, I wonder if Ramsey Dukes can be pinned down as the predecessor of the current that we seem to be in now, this rune soup style animist worldview. Mm. Because when I think about the content of Book of Demons and How to See Fairies, both of these are, I don't think he ever calls his approach to magical work animist, no. But the technique seems strikingly familiar, echoed in whatever this nameless current situation that we're in is.
I think so.
Would you say that we can point to him?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of people, but he's always an interesting character in that he seems to be a bit ahead of the game. And it is listed in Adian Walker's Six Ways as one of the bigger recommended books. Adian is really huge into animism. I think that you're entirely correct. He sees what's coming down the pipe, just like Pete, in some strange way. But where Pete is about techniques, Lionel's about the ideas, and he seems to be on the idea front well before anybody else. So I think that you're definitely there. The two ideas in those last two books seem to come before all of what we see before us now. And if what Saul and I are talking about seems a little bit, I don't know what they're talking about kind of thing, it's very popular, the idea of giving agency to things that we would normally consider in a materialist paradigm to be inanimate. Ramsey, specifically in How to See Fairies, goes through how you can look at trees and see life, how you can just walk down in a street and hear everything and just know where you are, using only psychometry to see absolutely all the life around you. So I think that Ramsey had a big part to play, and I wish he got a bit more recognition for that, for sure.
The essential technique of asking yourself, if I were seeing the spirit of this tree, what would it look like? And then running with that and trusting yourself to do it. That feels to me like a core technique of the current moment in magic. That to be willing to hand yourself over to visualization, to recognize that as a form of spirit communication. That's such a big idea, and I don't see it the way that Ramsey Dukes did it in other contemporary texts, but that might again be my vast ignorance.
He really hated the idea because he talks about it quite frequently in interviews, as when he was growing up, the idea of magic was mainly, besides the neo-pagan stuff, it was mainly things by W.E. Butler and the work of Dion Fortune, where an entirely psychological approach was put onto magic, where it's all in your head, and it's all about a way of self-actualization and getting right with your psychology. This was in some way not beneficial. And so even from his earlier works, you do have the little glimmer of, guess what? No, there's far more fantasy, the idea of fantasy is incorrect, and that the way that we've approached it, perhaps the original intuition that we had when we're younger, that this is the way that we do operate on the world, and it should be the way that we operate in the world. In a way, I would agree we're kind of living in the age of Ramsey, whether or not he's recognized for it. Maybe this podcast will help, because Ramsey's been with me since the beginning, and he's never gone away. Like, even when I was doing my little sojourn in what I call gift shop magic, Ramsey was still there. And he's never gone away. And we're living in an age where his ideas, although I don't believe he's ever used the word animism, his style is one of the things that a lot of people are gravitating towards. And it's not that it's better, I just think that it's more functional. Yes, check out his YouTube, check out all of his books. He is an absolute treasure. And I definitely will have a program on Ramsey. Who knows, I might even have an we'll see. I can't promise anything, but you never know. So for this episode, the hero is Ramsey Dukes. Let's shift gears here, and we're going to talk about currents of chaos. So we're going to talk about a couple of groups. I'm going to talk about two, and then Saul's going to talk about one, because one of them I'm not too familiar with. So hopefully we'll have a little bit of schooling the teacher here. The first group that we're going to talk about is the Luminates of Thanateros. For those that don't know, Thanateros is the Greek god of, I believe, an unviolent death. They were founded in 78, kind of founded in 78. Again, Ray Sherwin and Pete Carroll, they were writing for a magazine called The New Equinox, which was based off The Equinox from Aleister Crowley. They said that they were going to start a meritocracy order. So an order where the merits of the members would not decide how the order would operate, but more validity was given to you if you had more to offer. And it was based on virtue in a way. They also called it the Pact. And it was fairly popular, and groups, not just in London, but there were groups within Austria and the group in Germany that did their thing. I talked about it a little bit last episode with the Ice Magic Wars. The Pact was seemingly one of those things that it had movement to it. It certainly seemed like a movement, and it would have been attractive, of course, because they did have members join up, and even somewhat after the Ice Magic Wars, about 30% of the members dropped out of the IoT. Eventually, they became a bit more formal in a way, and Ray Sherwin, one of the founders, he dropped out of the IoT, saying that basically, like, the things that we were railing against, magical orders like the Golden Dawn and Thelema and the OTO, we've become that. The IoT to this day still exists, and you can sign up. Back in the day, at least when I was first interested in chaos magic, I knew that they had this policy of just rejecting a ton of people. It had a bit of prestige to it. I think what we have to understand about the IoT is that we all become what we hate if we aren't careful, and in this case, the IoT is definitely one of these things. If you look through any of the IoT documents, sometimes they get leaked to the internet. It looks like the Golden Dawn, like it just with some different figures. But yeah, they have the whole neophyte, they have the whole Adeptus Minor, and all of this stuff that just, frankly, I know it sounds appealing to a lot of people, but it's just meet the new boss, same as the old boss kind of thing. But Pete Carroll, he dropped out in, I believe, 93 after he released the book Liber Chaos. He had enough of the Ice Wars and Teigmeyer, Frater Ud, whatever his name is. There's several arguments against the IoT, and one of them is that yes, they just replaced the old orders, but in their defense they said, like, look, what we do, because chaos magic is very solo oriented, what we do is we offer a group dynamic to chaos magic, which is, to begin with, it was a little bit unexplored. So I don't know too much about this group work or what actually happens. There is apparently some secrecy involved, just because magic groups need to have their secrecy, etc., etc. The IoT and its function, it came under a lot of scrutiny in the first decade of the 21st century, not least of which by the editor of Chaos Magazine, and in Chaos Magazine, the final issue of Chaos Magazine, number 14, Joel Barocco had this to say about the IoT. He said, the basic criticism is that most of the defining works of chaos magic lacks depth. The IoT started as an organization set up by and for people of little occult insight who had a distaste for hierarchy and real initiation. That was about it, really. It got together a series of techniques that were but pale imitations of hierarchical ritual, fostered a taste for eclecticism, introduced pretend initiation, and oddly enough, lots of people with little occult insight and imagination started raving about it, no doubt because it appeared to them to be a shortcut into the occult. When I came along, this is Joel, to see what all the fuss was about in 1985, I was flabbergasted that such rubbish was the basis of what I had rapidly become known as the chaos current. And I also knew that this current had a true aspect, and I sought to bring out that aspect and evolve it, which meant I had to dispense with what I considered to be the glister of the current. So when you ask me what my criticism of the IoT is, perhaps you expect me to point out some deep ideological divide or something. No such luck, that I would have more time for it is simply that it is shallow rubbish peddled as something deep. I would actually consider it at all worthwhile going through one of their texts to do a point-by-point critique. I dismiss it as trash. That said, the Chaos Current did actually manage to attract later on quite a few talented individuals, which was great because it meant we could get something far more interesting going, something founded on new and evolving insights and coming out of a greater understanding of the Western magical tradition, something profound, not just a veneer of lame anarchy sprayed over a ragbag of occult techniques with little encompassing vision of the whole of which they were a part. It is truly astonishing to me that anybody could find anything amazing or interesting about the vision of the occult profounded by the likes of the IoT. And yet they did, in droves, and they still do. To me, that is a sad indication of the demise of the occultist. It became an accessory to a certain lifestyle involving liking certain bands and wearing black t-shirt, and at the end I began to criticize it in situationist terms, which seemed to go over the heads of those who I was criticizing. Given the situationist perspective, it was to be expected that the pop version of the Chaos Current should have become well known and widely propagated, whereas the true occult Chaos Current went underground. So there's a bit of vitriol in that, but I think there's...
turned this podcast into a murder scene. That was brutal.
Yeah. I remember reading that when it first came out, and Joel, who I find a very interesting character, there's a lot of anger in that last issue, specifically directed towards chaos magic, and this, again, was a little bit before the post-chaos discussion started happening in and amongst people, but... as spiteful as that does sound, there are things that are actually very, very bang on. And I think we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the IoT, still around. You can still join. You can still become a member. Go for it if you want to. But again, I wouldn't become a member of any group that would have a person like me as a member. I'm just going to say that for sure. The second group is called the Temple of Psychic Youth, otherwise known as TOPY. Now, I just want people to know that most likely I will at some point do a full episode on the Temple of Psychic Youth. Most likely it'll be with Keats Ross from the Prag Magic podcast. He's the guy to talk to for that kind of stuff. So this is just going to be a little taster sample of that. But it was founded in 1981 in England. A lot of people involved in the music scene in and around England, specifically through members of Throbbing Gristle. The lead singer for the band was a fellow by the name of Genesis Peorage, art student, very fascinated in the avant-garde, very fascinated by situationists and Dadaism and surrealism, and William Burroughs and Aleister Crowley and Austin Osman Spare. Yes, they formed this group, and it was a very loose collection. They didn't really have any hierarchy, although a lot of people said that the leader of the group was Genesis him or herself. Genesis basically said that this is not the case, but when somebody says the Temple of Psychic Youth, I think of Genesis Peerage, and it's just one of those things that I can't not. Their idea was to liberate themselves from societal control. And how would they do this? Well, magic, of course. So, again, they took a lot of their cues from Aleister Crowley and Austin Osman Spare, as well as using things like the cut-up techniques. They would use it in music. They would use it in the art that they produced. They had certain rituals where one of them would be that each person would draw a sigil at the 23rd hour of the 23rd day of each month, and then these would be mailed to a certain location to try and build up the power of these sigils. So, yeah, they were using sigil magic at a pretty early time. They were, I'm going to say, somewhat volatile group of individuals, but that's just what you're going to get when you have a lot of chaos magicians and musicians, even just musicians, let alone magicians, but musicians, that's going to be some fun. There was a criticism that there was a lot of the cult of personality, specifically geared towards Genesis Peerage. Yes, he denied this at the time, of course, and he just said like it was an open order and there's no hierarchy here. They did a lot of things that would freak out the squares, and this is early 80s, and they became very involved in the acid house music scene, and so that's one of the ways where chaos magic came into music in a way. In 1992, Genesis Peerage had accusations of ritual, sexual, satanic child abuse leveled against him. Apparently, they found videotapes of certain things, and in 1992, Channel 4 in England, through a program called Dispatches, did a whole segment on Genesis Peerage and the Temple of Psychic Youth. Genesis was away doing some, I believe, disaster relief work outside of England, and his flat was raided by the police, and they confiscated a whole bunch of artwork. They made a whole mess of absolutely everything. Turns out the videotapes, it was an art project, and it was an art project mainly done through, I believe, the filmmaker Derek Jarman. If people are familiar with Derek Jarman, he's a wonderful filmmaker. I believe he did a version of The Tempest. He also did Jubilee, which was one of the first punk rock movies made by punk rock kids. Yeah, there was really no pornography. We have to remember that there was something called the Satanic Panic that was happening. Do you remember the Satanic Panic at all there, Saul?
I was just growing up during that time, but I'm hearing about it a lot recently. People are reevaluating the extent to which it was real, which I did not expect to be on my 2020 bingo card.
A lot of things on that card. Yeah, I do remember, I would have been turning 10, but it's tough not to. I only had 3 channels growing up. But even still, it was almost everywhere, just the idea. And it seemed like the naughtiest thing that you could do when I was growing up was to draw a pentagram on your notebook. It's like, oh my God. But Genesis got caught up in all of this, and he felt fairly unsafe. And he eventually left England for a long period of time to live in New York. Only came back, I think, maybe 15 years before he passed away. He passed away this year on March 14th, 2020, I believe. And yeah, he stayed out of England for a very long period of time. What we have to understand is that Genesis left the Temple of Psychic Youth early 90s, just basically saying, like, I don't want to have anything to do with it, I'm doing something else, and then he went on to work with another thing called The Process, which I don't have time to talk about right now, but the Temple of Psychic Youth continues to this day, in a way, and people are still using a lot of the techniques. It's fairly fangless, though, at this point, as a lot of orders that were founded more than 20 years ago seem to be. Do you have any insights as to the Temple of Psychic Youth, or is there anything that you find overly interesting about them, Saul? Or?
It has been something I've been thinking about, and I'll introduce this with my funny Topi story. One day I was sitting on my couch reading up about Topi, and I'd opened up one of their documents.
Right.
And it started out strong, very punk rock, very, very DKMU style, actually. And at this moment, a very old friend from my college days messaged me out of the blue. And so I, feeling frisky, said, hey, read this. This is very much your style. I think that you would really vibe with this. And so I sent him this document that I was only about a quarter to a halfway through reading. And so being a good sport, he, on his end, started reading as well. And then I continue with my work. And at that point, this Topi document transitions into a lurid description of creating a Topi-style sigil, which, for those of the listeners that aren't familiar, involves 4 kinds of sexual fluid, the commission of your most transgressive sexual fantasy,
Yes.
with the assurance that once filed in the Topi archives, it will never be seen again. There was, as I recall, a scandal about who did and did not have access
Yeah.
to what I can only imagine was a really fascinating collection of sexual documents. Anyway, the blood is draining from my face as I'm going through this increasingly horny document that I just sent to my college friend. I bring this up because, to my mind, one of the things that separates the mass movements of chaos from the 80s and 90s, from what came after, was a sense of transgression that isn't available to us as magicians anymore.
No.
It's that difference between magicians of a certain age to whom Baphomet is still the devil,
Right.
in a really just luxuriant kind of ox blood and frankincense kind of way. And then magicians of my set, to whom Baphomet is this interesting, queer, burgeoning god of the world that is involved with the irrepressible and amoral cycle of life. And this moment in history is when Baphomet is the devil and jerking off onto a piece of paper is transgressive.
Right.
And it's so hard now to maintain that sense of transgression in a way that's magically useful. And I think that's one of the things that defanged Topi and defanged the IoT.
Yeah.
The kind of things that you can still read on chaosmatrix.org, which has a number of
Brings me back.
serial numbers filed off IoT rituals.
Yeah.
I can imagine that to a 20-year-old in 1995, hot flashes of delight would suffuse you when you read through this, especially if you weren't already aware of what goes on in the OTO, for instance.
Right.
But now, it's all very dusty. No, I take that back. Some of it seems very dusty. Some of it still crackles with power.
Right.
The sexuality of Topi is just something that can no longer be reproduced in 2020. I can't imagine that.
We forget that the 80s had a period, specifically in England, the 80s had a period of time, well, of course, there was the AIDS pandemic that was occurring, but there was, I forget the name of the document, but certain groups wanted to outlaw homosexuality. There was a huge uproar against it. So when I say freak out the squares, I'm literally talking about what Saul is talking about, sexual transgressions. Saul is right. It did put a timer on the shelf life for groups like the IoT, and more specifically for a group like the Temple of Psychic Youth. The stuff that they were promulgating is so locked in time. It's so time specific to these groups, where the idea of apocalypse culture and getting rid of genders and all this stuff, which now seems, I'm not going to say it's normal, but it is treated with less obloquy than it was before, gave these groups quite a bit of power and things to go off of. And of course, Saul is right. Like, as a 20-year-old reading about this stuff on the internet, that's got a certain allure to it. Nowadays, I'm not going to say it reads to be very dated, but it kind of reads to be a little bit dated. It doesn't mean that it's not functional, but it's just so time specific to me, and it's tough for me to get around that. The groups themselves, they might have been necessary in a time to gain some kind of traction in the world that they were trying to operate in, where they felt like a lack of control. Again, the Temple of Psychic Youth was more about liberation from societal control, be that...
And you know what? Maybe it worked.
Yeah.
It's so easy to become pessimistic about the big magic that we dream of doing, but the fact that we can sit here going, yawn, Topi sigils, sexual fluids, how cute. Perhaps groups like Topi and the DKNU in their own right succeeded in changing the consensus reality that we now have the privilege to be weird individualists in, or at least we're part of that shift. It's nice to think about, and perhaps thinking about it itself is a magical operation that can connect us.
Agree. Absolutely. Yeah, perhaps their magic really worked. But reading it as a historical document, it seems so tethered to its time, strangely enough. We have to take a step back and do what Saul just did and say, like, was chaos magic actually on the boots on the ground movement? And it's tough because, again, we don't have a lot of perspectives of the groups themselves. We have a lot of perspectives of people that were members of these groups, and we have their perspectives, but we don't really have an official archives that we can go to basically say, was there ever a chaos magic movement? Personally speaking, I think that there certainly was in some respect. How successful they were remains to be seen, and there really hasn't been a full examination of it. And I find that very odd because chaos magic is magic. It's nearly on everybody's lips, or for a period of time it was. And I do think that right now chaos magic is more alive than it has ever been. At least the Chaos Toolkit is. But as far as a movement is concerned, these groups, were they the movement? Or was it the actions because of the hard work that these groups did afterwards that created a movement? And it's some of those things that I'm perplexed to this day as to whether or not it really was. The groups themselves, they seem to be in two categories as far as chaos magic, late 70s and the early 80s to the 90s or so, is they either took themselves way too seriously or they didn't take themselves seriously at all. There was no real middle ground. It was very binary or black and white. You have a group, I believe they're called Loon, the Lincoln order of neuromancers, really silly Discordian stuff, or it was really, really crazy, not crazy is maybe the wrong word, but just everything that Saul was talking about. Lots of body fluids everywhere, lots of sexual transgressions, or what was perceived as sexual transgressions at the time, all of this fun stuff. So we also had this breath, or a gust, I would say a gust of fresh air, in the 90s with the opening of the internet. You had a horribly primitive GeoCities and Angel Fire web pages that at least they had the documents, right? They had the important stuff there. You could find Ray Sherwin's Book of Results. You can find segments of Liber Null and Psychonaut. And there was a lot of forums that would have been open and people were discussing. So chaos magic was still in some way alive in the 90s, even if there were not a lot of orders that were promulgating certain ways that the movement should have headed. And so you can understand why somebody like Joel Barocco would say some of the things that he said. It's just because we had these small little snippets of what people conceived of as being chaos magic. And anybody can do chaos magic, so you get a lot of the bad as well as a lot of the good, and it's tough to sift through all of them. When I started magic, it would have been 2003. I went to see the state of chaos magic on the internet, and I was horrified by it. I was completely turned off. It seemed incredibly elitist, and I'll just use the word ugly. So I basically signed off and just basically said, I'm going to stick with the books. I've got the books. I've got Phil Hine. I've got Pete. I've got Ramsey. I've got Austin Spare if I need. And I just stayed there. But Saul has a bit of a different perspective because he, in some way, correct me if I'm wrong, Saul, this is where you picked up a lot of your knowledge. It was from the internet.
I am an older millennial. I'm a digital native. And in many ways, I'm really grateful to have come to it through the internet because it allowed me to get a kaleidoscopic view of all the things that were possible. And then in the style that kind of defines my generation, to then begin curating and curating and curating. The downside of this is that everything I know is a collage. But this is the thing that I find a little surprising, but also as a data point in favor of what you say, that chaos magic is the current of today still, despite everything. Because it took me about a month of poking my nose into things to go from being aware of chaos magic to having an incredibly strongly positive view of it.
Right.
To effectively slotting myself into it as my magical home base. Right. That this would become the ground from which I would launch all of my other expeditions. And the story of me plugging in to online occult spaces, I think, is really typical of this. I became aware of a servitor that had been created on occultforums.org in, I think it was like 2006 or something. It was Saint Etic, a servitor designed to bring information to novices in chaos magic. And I don't think this was an IoT person that was involved in this. This was already post-IoT. This was already online dissemination of magic. It was a squirrel, the sigil, horrifying. Just such a mess.
Right.
And my first step into being online as a magician was updating the Saint Edic sigil.
Oh, there you go.
I spent a couple of days fixing the stroke order, doing a calligraphic version of it. I made myself a Reddit account,
Nice.
posted it, and immediately was just absolutely traduced by the first person that posted on it in like 5 minutes. It was a horrifying experience, but then I started trawling more through Reddit. The DKMU became the city on the hill in my worldview because of all of what remained, all of their documents, their history of this pulsating, urban, vibrant moment when being a chaos magician meant being in a loft apartment with bizarre music pulsing in the background and people writhing on the floor and new gods swirling through the air. Right. That moment of chaos magic where your experience of the liminal world was so intimately linked to the experiential. I think that's a role of magical orders and a role of chaos magic itself that has been lost right now. We have the toolkit, but we don't have that reality cracking teleology that we see in the DKMU. I don't know how big of a loss that is, how upset we should be. My gut impulse is that instead of trying to create a massive chaos bee that will sound effectively like something out of Thelema, maybe this is something that should be getting more of our attention contemporaneously. Maybe total magic was the achievement of the 90s and early aughts chaos magic movement, that because now we all sit in front of screens. I don't say that as a criticism, that's what I do all the time. Right. But because our mode is either being the arch solitary practitioner begging the headless god to unfuck your life, or being on Twitter with all of your friends, complaining about how he didn't unfuck your life. The middle ground of getting together with all of your friends and collectively begging the headless one. Right. I think I would like to see more of that in my own life and in the lives of those I care about. Right. For our sake and for the sake of keeping consensus reality moving in a direction that is more tolerable. Right.
What is DKMU?
I would like to preface this that no one should trust anything that I'm saying. Please view me as a trickster spirit for the duration, because, as I mentioned, everything I know is a collage, but I will endeavor to transmit what little I know.
Okay.
The DKMU, Domus Chaotica Marauder Underground, as you can tell from the name, is a combination of two organizations. They were separate message boards in the 90s that, through a thrilling story of hacker interference, were forced to merge. Everything about DKMU has this glister of charm about a glamour about all of it. And that is so typical of it. Here's what I understand about their core value. The thing that makes them different from the other magical orders that we've talked about. IoT is effectively theurgic in its goals. Right. It does the same things as the Thelemites want to do, but make it edgier. Right. So they're theurgic. Topi is also about the individual uplift of magicians in order to bring about a better world. DKMU is not about the individual at its core. All magicians are working on themselves, but what DKMU wanted was to forcibly crack reality open, to non-consensually and sweatily re-scramble consensus reality to make the world more enchanting.
Through the internet, Saul?
No, through a number of techniques like glamour bombing, which is when you and your terrorist cell of DKMU types would go out into a public space and, through the manipulation of objects, try to wake the sheeple up. You would post a weird poster, or you would mess with the scenery. You would stack stones. You would distribute incomprehensible leaflets of occult knowledge. You would do whatever you could to aggressively attack consensus reality. Your objective was, through this kind of guerrilla insurgency into the life of people minding their own businesses, not being magicians, you would be planting the seeds so that consensus reality itself would be shaken.
And did this stuff actually happen IRL? In real life,
yeah.
if you will?
Yeah, so they weren't centralized, to my understanding, but to really do DKMU, you gotta have you have to have your squad.
Right.
And your involvement in the real world. I feel discomfort with the term real world because the internet is real as well, but your involvement with public spaces, with gray face infiltrated spaces, was the center of attention, to my understanding. Reading the documents of this movement is really exciting. It's an exciting view of the world. It's a beautiful view of the world. There was a glamour of getting a little bit cracked yourself in the process of slowly losing your mind in order to meet the gods. Intensely appealing.
How does the linking sigil enter into the DKMU? I don't know if people have seen the linking sigil. If you're a little bit familiar with Twitter and with Chaos Magic Online, you've no doubt seen the L and the S of the linking sigil. It's fairly familiar. I'll have a show note about it. I've seen them here in Toronto. I literally have seen them spray painted on the walls.
That's wonderful. Yeah. I have written the linking sigil in the dust at Arcosanti, Arizona.
There you go.
The linking sigil was a mistake, but the linking sigil started out very simply as a way of networking magical input, a power grid. And then it started to expand into a way of linking places into this network to pump the numinous around in the physical world. If you're in a place that doesn't have the VU and should have it, draw the linking sigil to draw it in. If you're in a place that is already crackling with the inexplicable, draw the linking sigil there to put it into the network. The catty criticism of this is that it turned into the linking sigil being drawn in a lot of men's bathrooms. Fine.
Okay.
For a while, magical terrorists were throwing pebbles with the linking sigil on it into places they had no access to, or places where they couldn't put down a graffito. And in the process of doing this, the linking sigil, the LS, became Ellis, a god form. The linking sigil woke up.
Right.
And they found that in the linking sigil, there was this personality that seems to have emerged from it, this woman in red, a Victorian kind of Lolita goth thing. It was a creature of its time. The linking sigil now had an agenda of its own. And this, by the way, is the kind of story that pulled me into magic. I point to this kind of thing, and I say, this is what made me a magician.
Okay.
The development of the red woman out of a sigil that had a very kind of uninteresting technical function.
Right.
She became a gate to the most interesting, to my mind, part of the DKMU experience, because this first god form, they saw what they had done accidentally, that their movement has now been hijacked by the god inside the linking sigil network.
Right.
And I said, well, if we could do this, let's see who else is trying to emerge out of us into reality. And so a cycle of god forms began to expand out of the DKMU project. They are all so strange and specific. They don't answer a particular need. No one sat down and said, I need a servitor to find me girlfriends. And then you have the girlfriend goddess.
Right.
You have figures like Doombringer, this inscrutable initiator figure at the top of his ziggurat. You have Ino, a lunar goddess of knowledge and insight. You have you have Zalti, who is pirate themed, accidentally, who apparently is one of the best. Zalti, Sri Ganesha, please don't listen to this. He's effectively the DKMU Ganesha, as far as I understand it. To all accounts, the DKMU's lasting legacy is this constellation of interesting new gods that are still, as far as we can tell, active today, even though they seem to have lost most of their worshippers. I don't know anybody who is currently cultivating Osei terrifying Trigag, who is this very chthonic, terrifying extraterrestrial, almost pneumogram style divinity of insane outer reaches of magical and teleological space. But if you call them, they still come. I am all about the development of extra or metahuman spirits. Because I'm queer, because I'm in a very particular social location, I don't feel comfortable walking up to grimoire spirits and invoking the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. I am explicitly non-Christian, de-Christianized polytheist.
Right.
And to be in this weird country at this terrifying moment in time, I love the idea of new gods emerging from this moment. Yeah. And that's the beauty of DKMU.
And it's still ongoing, is it?
There is a extensive and beautifully written series of evocations of the DKMU Godform cycle that is kind of old.
Okay.
I think it's from around 2015. The misbehavior is ongoing.
Right.
And I would love to see it be more ongoing. The problem is there's no ongoing cult to bind people together into the spaces where you try to evoke Trigag and hope that you come out the other side okay. It is a mystery to me what shut down the DKMU, except perhaps that the people involved got older and got married and weren't going to that loft apartment with a CRT monitor in the background. It's something I have nowhere to start to explain why this passed away, because we are in the moment of thought forms and the field of spirit and unnamed spirits. I mean, everybody loves Aidan Wachter, and the same universe where he is operating with unnamed local spirits is the same universe where you get Ellis accidentally out of a linking sigil.
There'll be some show notes about the DKMU. It's one of those things that I'm incredibly unfamiliar with, but it seems like something definitely worth investigating, I think, for people. I hope that people will, because from your vantage, this is what you miss from Chaos Magic now, right? Yeah,
absolutely. This was the dream, the goal. My idea of what my best life as a magician would look like was informed by that first encounter with a moment that has passed.
Right.
The once and future Toby.
Got it. So what can we talk about with Chaos Magic nowadays? What was retained from Chaos Magic? I've got a couple of ideas what I think that, what the good aspects, not the good aspects, but the more honorable aspects of Chaos Magic. And the first one is iconoclasm, I think. That was retained through Chaos. And a lot of people, when they think of Chaos Magic now, they immediately think of Chaos Magic coming from a purely psychological model. And I think that this has fallen away to the wayside, especially in the last 10 years, that we realized that the psychological model was only one of the models that can be used. Very few Chaos magicians nowadays will talk about the psychology inherent in Chaos Magic, and I think that has fallen away. One of the pitfalls of Chaos Magic is that Chaos Magic won the magic argument very early, and it has continued to try and keep reminding us that it has won the argument early, which is something that I think we have to get away from a little bit. We have to allow room for some more perspectives. But the emphasis, and I mentioned it last episode, the emphasis on context and comparison as well as a duty to historical accuracies is very pertinent in this day and age. And again, last episode, that everything is on the table now. So we need to see outside of Western magic at other ontologies, other epistemologies, and other phenomena. Like, I don't know if I drove the nail in enough last episode to make it plaintively clear that as Chaos magicians, or just as magicians in general, we can't not look at things like near-death experiences. We can't not look at things like UFO encounters. We can't not look at spiritualism. It's all on the table, and we need to some way bring it in. And in a way that is almost iconoclastic, because for a long time, magic was pushing this stuff off to the side. Like, that's not real magic. Now it is. And in fact, through some kind of a Chaos Magic perspective, we realize that might be better magic than what we've been told. And I think that this is one of the great things that chaos magic has. I think that chaos magic is needed. The main reason for it, and I don't know if you agree with me, Saul, is that chaos magic is seemingly inherently curious. They veer away from solid explanations, and although most occultists wouldn't say that they are chaos magicians, a lot of them have definitely taken from the chaos magic toolkit. This is not to say that chaos magic is the only place where curiosity exists within magic, but I think that to have it as one of the major tenets of chaos magic is a very important thing. We stay away from explanations. And Saul and I, before this podcast, our relationship was mainly on a form of social media called Twitter. I don't know if anybody's heard of it. Anyways. But what's great now is that before, what initially turned me off from chaos magic was the idea that a lot of people that called themselves chaos magicians would say, this is this because I know so. Nowadays, we can discuss, and usually it's a very good-natured discourse, as Saul does every once in a while. He'll put out a thought of something that's happening, and you will get a perspective from astrologers, you'll get a perspective from those following the spirit model, you'll get the animists chiming in because we do, you'll get those that are purely involved in theurgy, and it never, ever devolves into name-calling. It's all on the table, and it's usually, well, sometimes it does. I've had my interactions. But I think that this is maybe one of the best things that came off of chaos magic, is that we realize now that all discourse is needed, no matter where it comes from, and that it's all relevant in some way. These approaches, what makes you interested in magic, is as important as everybody else. Nobody's magic is better than anybody else's magic. And I think this is a wonderful legacy for chaos magic. And it's through this, the approaches of chaos, that we have to realize that a set system might be fun, specifically when in orders and things like the IoT or Temple of Psychic Youth. But perhaps most of us now realize that we're on our own, and that maybe you should be a bit scared. You need to be bold. It's because of this that you have to realize that you are a pirate. You are not in the Navy. The idea of magic being a navy is a very harmful way of thinking about magic, in my opinion. That there is this one movement trying to somehow imperialistically take things over and claim things for themselves is not the way to approach chaos magic. When I use the term pirate, I'm using the fantasy pirate. If we were to research historical pirates, they were shithead bullies, most of them. Remember, chaos magic, certain fantasy elements can certainly speak greater truths than historically accurate. I'll just say that. Find your wins. Make yourself captain. Choose your crew. What taverns do you find yourself in when you head into shore? Where do you have a drink of grog? Who's there? What stories of treasure and adventure can they tell? Do they have certain things that they can say that will guide you? And what about yourself, and what attitudes do you yourself see as a chaos magician? This is going to be somewhat current, but I literally today downloaded Mitch Horowitz's new book called The Miracle Habits. Now, I'll just preface this by saying that Mitch is not a chaos magician. He calls what he does anarchic magic, and he says that it's a cousin of chaos magic. His definition of chaos magic, I think, and this is zero shade, but he basically says that chaos magicians mainly go off of a psychological model, and I don't think that has been relevant for well over 20, 25 years. Anyways.
Every magician I know is a spirit model magician.
The psychological model, I don't think it holds true for chaos magic in any way. Anyways, Mitch in this book, and I've only flipped through it very fleetingly, I can say that this will probably be a book that I will recommend to beginners because it's wonderful so far. And as far as pirating, it's got pirate virtues in it. And these are focus, the idea of self-responsibility, solidarity, honorable speech, spending to power, and never dithering. And these are important attributes. And if it helps to think of yourself as a pirate on the seas, that is a very useful model for a lot of us. And there's even a book on chaos magic and piracy, and it's such a tired analogy, but I find it's a really, really good one, and it certainly helps me. Have you ever thought of yourself as a pirate?
Never an archetype that resonated with me, but I am so pleased to be able to dedicate this and its repetitions to you, Zalti, if you're listening.
Piracy, I think, specifically the fantasy, your idea of the pirate that you have in your head is something you should try to use the word navigate towards. Now, this leads into another thing that I'm just going to try and fit in here in this episode about getting started in magic. I'm getting a lot of emails, and this is not me saying that I'm tired of them, because I ask for people at the end of every episode, reach out, please reach out. And they're mainly asking two things. One, what books do you suggest, and where do I start? I think I have to make it very clear to people, you can literally start anywhere. One of my heroes, Charles Fort, says that you measure a circle starting anywhere. That's the same thing with magic. You need the bad books as much as you need the good books, I think. If Golden Dawn is interesting to you, go for the Golden Dawn. I mean, I do not think that my time with that kind of magic was a waste of time. You need the bad books. And a lot of the times when you're reading a book, you won't know it's a bad book until a little bit later, but it doesn't make them less important in any way. One of the clear signals that people should have, that I think comes from a chaos magic perspective, is when somebody was asking one of a major scholar on the works of Carl Jung, how did Carl Jung do active imagination? He didn't leave any notes. He didn't give us the process. He said something very profound, and he said, if you're doing active imagination, which is almost like a form of very directed daydreaming, he says that if something moves, follow it. And this goes for magic. If something moves, you follow it. Saul's initial impulse towards the DKMU, it moved. He went after it. And I'm pretty sure that you learned a ton on your journey, did you not?
So much. Some of it not useful, some of it that I think about every day.
This was something that I was debating as to whether to put in here, but I'm just going to do it a little bit, but it'll probably be covered on the specific episode. For myself, something that really moved me was finding out that there weren't just things called witches. There were these people called cunning folk. The idea of what's the difference between a cunning folk and a cunning man or cunning woman to a witch that's an episode for another time. But for me, learning about cunning folk was so unbelievably important. Informed a lot of my worldview and how I approached magic. Now, cunning folk were the people that you would go to help for healing, for certain things. A lot of them were very literate, but they did not rest on their laurels. There's the idea that witches are born, but cunning men and women are made. This is one of the things that I think was really, really important to me. It's the lust to keep knowing and learning and keep going that I think is very, very important for those starting out in magic. So cunning is a great word to use, specifically for chaos magic. You have to be cunning. And that doesn't just mean, cunning in your magic and how you put spells together, but cunning in your life. Again, chaos is life. There's no givens in magic at all. That's another thing that we need to understand. There is no right place to start. You have to earn everything. Everything is about work. I was saying this to Saul earlier. I do think that anybody can do magic, but I think that you don't realize just how much work it actually is. And that's one of the things that turns a lot of people off of magic, is just that we think that if we do one spell, we immediately get what that one spell was trying to accomplish. That's not how it works, and strangely enough. It's just a ton of work, and you can't stop at any point. This needs to be at least recognized by a lot of people. I've mentioned it in a previous episode, and it was something that Carl Jung said. He says that there is no linear evolution. There is only a circumambulation of the self. My website exists, and my podcast exists for you to know that I have all of your back, and I'm here for you. But I am definitely not a doyen of magic. I'm a seeker just like you. Please understand. One of the most important books on magic is a book called Apocalyptic Witchcraft by Peter Gray. The last chapter of that book, Hic Rhoda, Hic Salta, changed my life. I believe it's pronounced Hic Rhoda, Hic Salta, doesn't matter. It means here's roads, jump here, leap here. The expression itself is used to mean prove yourself right here, right now. But I find the second part of that expression very fascinating. And to Peter Gray in Apocalyptic Witchcraft, it meant something very profound to him as well. And it was through the book that I took the idea of jump here. And I want people to try and understand that you literally can, on any one of my episodes, jump here. You don't need to start anywhere. You don't need to know a certain thing first. I can give various recommendations, but you can jump here at any point. So I want the idea of hic salta to realize that that's one of the wonderful things about chaos magic, is that there is no structure. There is no best way of starting. Every way of starting is the best way of starting. What was your first, when did you know that you wanted to do the magic thing?
It's such a stupid and funny story. It starts with a garden statue.
A garden statue. Was it a gnome?
No,
Oh.
It was a, frankly, fucky minotaur
Oh, nice.
that I found on Amazon. And I took this garden statue to my husband and I said, wouldn't it be funny, like haha as a joke, if we got this statue and did an idolatry to it? This rapidly spiraled out of control. So I think this was after I had encountered the idea of DKNU thought forms, but it might have been the other way around. I actually can't remember whether I decided I needed to build a god or whether I was already aware of that, whether I was finding out how or had already been made aware of the possibility. But so this garden statue comes home, and pretty soon my household has an altar to it, to a household god that we are building from scratch. And in a sort of literal way, this constructed or perhaps coagulated divinity taught me magic in order that I was able to put it together. One of the things that I love about magic, and one of the things that indicates to me that the field of spirit is actually responding to me, that I'm encountering something outside of myself, is how unexpected and sometimes embarrassing the specifics can be.
Right.
When I find myself chasing a god that I would never in a million years have consented to someone that I would one day be a devotee of Lord Ganesha, for instance, never would that have slotted into my self-concept. But that, for me, is how magic often works. Things coagulate in my life in ways that are so unpredictable that to me they must be real. And so that's how I file my garden statue story.
Nice.
It's still at the center of my altar currently, and now I'm a magician, not a very good one, but
Stop it.
that's where my identity has coiled together.
Yeah.
And there are so many things that I think and do and experience that are inconceivable from the perspective of Saul M 2 years ago,
Right.
much less 3.
But you're happy you took the leap, though, huh?
It's impossible for me to imagine the version of myself that didn't. I play with the multiple timelines way of thinking about reality.
Right.
And I know there are uncountable versions of me to which this didn't happen, but it's hard to imagine what they're like, or even how they could stay that way now.
Yeah.
At those moments when you look at yourself and you think, oh my God, magic has ruined my life. I am the evil wizard that has put a curse on my life.
Yeah.
And I think, what if I just stopped? What if I quit while I was ahead?
Well, you could have done what I did. I was, to use the expression, it's not the best one that I have, but I was in the closet. I kept it a secret from everybody that was dear to me. The fact that when I visited home last December, that it was news to everybody was shocking. A few of them were like, all right, it makes sense, but I kept it a secret. And this podcast, doors are now open. I mean, if anybody had taken a look, more than a 3-second look at my bookshelf, they would be like, what books are on your shelf, Douglas? There's some weird books. But other than that, I never talked about it. I get what you're saying. I can't see a future where I'm not what I am now. It's strange. It's strange at how it happens, and it's quite lovely. The point is, you can start anywhere. It could be a garden statue. It can be a stupid DVD that from a video store that you worked at when you were 20 years old. It can be anywhere. And that's the beautiful thing about it. Start anywhere. Now, to wrap up this two-parter of Chaos Magic is very difficult. This might seem like the most uneloquent way to do so, but I've tried to, for myself, distill Chaos Magic into the purest form that they can for themselves.
I want to try.
Go ahead.
Right now, in my current metaphysics, I think this is true. And I get this from Alan Chapman.
Okay.
I think the core of Chaos Magic is this dictum that all magic comes down to deciding that two things mean the same thing. I think that is the core of chaos magic, to decide that one thing is the same as presumably an outcome,
Right.
and then to do it.
You're not talking about correspondences, right? You're talking about like the ritual that I'm doing now.
Right.
Yes.
That crumpling up a piece of paper and tossing it into a room, this is a chaos grenade,
Right.
to use a classic
Yeah.
example. That applies to all magic that I can think of. And I know that sounds very psychological, which makes it dissatisfying. But it also points to one of the open questions in chaos magic and the chaos toolkit. How much does historical repetition, the establishment of form and belief of others matter? And how much does your own modification of belief matter? Because they both seem to matter a lot.
Yes.
So in the chaos worldview, you decide that two things mean the same thing, but you seem to also get a boost if a lot of other people have decided the same thing.
Yeah.
And the mechanics of that and managing that, I think, are one of the areas I would like to see explored philosophically in magic right now. Okay, so that's my core of chaos magic. What's yours?
For me, chaos magic comes down to two words, and they're very simple words. They're monosyllabic words. The first is try, and the second is so. Now, let's talk through the first one, try. I think the idea of just trying things is almost enough, and I find that I am rewarded constantly for trying different things. Currently, I'm going through a audiobook series of Neil Gaiman's Sandman. I forgot for a period of time that the core message of those books, and it's a comic book, is you change or you die. And that is a very important thing for me that I've forgotten. You are never locked down in one thing. And I know a lot of people that like magic, and this is no shade. A lot of people that like magic, they stay in one place. They get effective at one form of magic or divination, and they just stay there. And to me, it's not a bad thing, but it's not the way that I've seen the greatest riches or treasures, to use the pirate analogy again. It's by trying new things. And that's where a lot of the ideas of comfort being deadly come from for me. The second is so. And this comes from the fact that I talked about it a little bit earlier, the idea of certainty within magic. I think it's one of the worst things that we have. And anybody who speaks from a place of authority, I'm immediately suspicious of. When I release an episode on the Golden Dawn and somebody sends me a very lovely direct message through either Twitter or Instagram saying how wrong I am, and then will proceed to correct me, I literally answer so, because the magic occurs within the curiosity itself. And there's a beautiful tension that occurs. Try is curiosity, so is inquiry. The tension is beautiful, as I said. And that is why chaos magic and the chaos life is, I feel, the best suited to this day and age for people wanting to get into magic. Many get into magic that they want to have wisdom and solace in a world of chaos and turmoil and whatnot. And it's not to say that this is not a part of magic. It's not the main point of magic, the dissolution of the ego and this kind of thing. I see it as part of magic that is like a wind, to go back to being the pirate. It's fine when it happens. When those calm winds occur, that's great. And when you happen upon them, because they will happen, this solace and this wisdom, it's great. But that's not the only thing that's there. A smooth sea rarely makes a skilled pirate. And we have to realize that the chaos that you see all around you is best adopted and best adapted to. So I want people to try and look at the things within their lives and within the world of magic itself and see the troubled seas and see their way into them and through them. And that is what I think chaos brings to the table in the most beautiful way possible. A smooth sea never makes a skilled pirate. And so that's the two-parter of chaos magic, Saul. Wonderful. You made it, bud.
There's so much more. And
there's got to be far more to chaos magic than this.
I look forward to part 3 in a year, where we talk about the information model of magic, cyber magic, media magic.
Mimetic magic.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much.
The most cursed of the divisions, as far as I can tell.
Wonderful. Saul, I've already talked about it a little bit, your Twitter page, and with your permission, I would love to put it up in the show notes because I think that you have this earnest that is very unique to yourself. And there's been times where an eloquence of uncertainty comes through things that you write. This is not to try and put you down in any way, but a vulnerability that a lot of magicians don't have, or at least aren't comfortable talking about. But to you, it's almost second nature. Is that you understand that you need a little help from your friends, and you understand that the other pirates might be there to be able to offer some advice. And so I would love for everybody to go to your Twitter account and to be a friend with you, because I think that the conversations that we've always had, for one, they're fucking hilarious, but they're very lovely and they're very charming. And I think that I want to put the bug in your ear. I don't think you can stop with just having a Twitter account. I think you might have to dip your toe into the podcast world in some way. Can you imagine?
That is incredibly kind of you. What I would like to say to everyone listening is that if you are trying to get started in magic, Twitter is actually, I know this is weird to say, but Twitter is a really great place to be right now. This moment on that particular form of social media has been a blessing in my life. The people that I've encountered, what they're working on, and the amount I learn every day, even if I do have to wade through what seems like a metric fuck ton of astrology every 10 minutes, just another dump truckload of it. But don't go to Reddit.
No.
It's a horrible place.
It is.
If you are like me and more inclined to filter feed your way through the occult rather than to leverage exquisite research skills and tomes upon tomes, I can't think of a better way to do it. You will find the others and you'll find what you're looking for, and you'll have so many tabs open.
Yeah.
What could be better?
I'm quite shocked at just how supportive everybody is, and it's really quite wonderful. I mean, but yes, you do have to do some sifting, but everybody, be a friend with Saul. His link will be in the show notes. He's a wonderful person to have there, and I've enjoyed every single one of my conversations with Saul. And thank you so much for being on the show, Saul. It's amazing. So for those of you interested, head to whatmagicisthis.com. There you will find a way to subscribe to my podcast, be it on iTunes or Spotify. If they have podcasts, I'm going to be listed there. I just want to let everybody know I'm everywhere. I'm soon to be on Amazon. They're doing the podcast thing now, so yay. Be a pirate is basically what I'm saying. I'll put myself anywhere.
Also, and we're all excited for the eventual Patreon.
Yes.
Talk, please.
Fingers crossed it'll happen soon. Something will happen soon, for sure. Also on my webpage, you'll find my links to Twitter. Again, you can see and take part in the wonderful discourse that I share with Saul or with any of my other magical friends. They're all great, and it is a really good time right now for Twitter and magic. It really is. This is the sweet spot. So please head there. You can also find my Instagram account, and you'll find my Facebook account on whatmagicisthis.com. Every episode gets a ton of show notes. This one will have some amazing stuff from DKMU. There'll be Temple of Psychic Youth. There'll be the Illuminates of Thanatos on there as well. I'll even have a link if you really want to join up. There you go. Yes, lots of show notes for every single one of my episodes. I really go out of my way, and people love them. It's really helpful. Again, Hic Salta, every episode. Hic Salta. Jump here. Also, if you enjoy my podcast, please leave a review. I appreciate that. The whole star clicky thing on iTunes is fun, but guess what? Words and letters combined to form sentences speak so much louder. And I've got quite a few new reviews, and everybody's being so kind. So thank you all for saying something about my podcast. That's really quite wonderful. If you enjoy the show, tell a friend, because sharing is caring. And if they're weird like you, I'm sure they'd enjoy the podcast. Yeah, that would be wonderful. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. You can still ask for book suggestions, guys. I'm not saying that in this episode, don't reach out to me about asking for book recommendations. I'll still give you them. If you have anything, I'm not a scary person. So reach out if you really want to. Yes, that is the end of Chaos Magic Part 2. Most likely Chaos Magic Part 3. We may have a little bit of a break before we do that, but we can't stop at Part 2. There's got to be more, because there is so much. Chaos is life. It really is, or it seems to be. We have to end the show on the post-show quid pro quo. Saul, are you ready?
I have been waiting this whole time.
Oh, well, this will be an interesting one, because we're in Chaos Magic. So I have to ask you, Saul, if you had any fictional character that you could be, which fictional character would you be? And why?
I would love to inhabit the character of Asterion as given in the Borges story. His version of the Minotaur, this deeply philosophical, lonely creature that exists in a liminal space between confined reality and the infinite. And yes, I am a cattle-themed magician, and yes, that's part of why I give this answer. Yeah, I wouldn't mind living through that. And then coming back, because of course, he never does anything and then dies. But to experience the Borgesian infinite in this way, I think would be very pleasing.
Amazing, Saul. Wonderful answer. It's the easy questions that 5-year-olds would ask each other. That are always the hardest questions. But I think that there's so many characters. I couldn't even. Saul, wonderful. Thank you so much. I've had an absolute pleasure having you on. I'd love to have you back on the show. I think that would be wonderful. And that's the show, everybody. Thank you for listening, and thank you again, Saul. And everybody, come on back. We'll talk about more of this crazy, strange, chaotic, pirate-themed magic that everybody loves so much. So with that, I want everybody to stay healthy, stay hopeful, and stay luminous. And we will talk at you soon. Bye-bye.